Good. We'll turn to Revelation 13, but we'll be in the second part of the chapter. And in the first part of chapter 13, we were introduced to the beast from the sea. In chapter 12, there was a dragon. In chapter 13, there is a beast from the sea who is given a power from the dragon. The dragon is Satan, the serpent, the devil. The beast is not the devil, but is an instrument of the devil on earth. And last time I said that the first beast is representative of the political sphere, corrupt governments, perverted state. And in the first century, it was clearly the Roman Empire. But it's true wherever there is a perverse and corrupt, diabolical infusion of power in the state. But in the second half of chapter 13, we're introduced to the second beast. The first beast comes from the sea, the second beast comes from the earth. And the second beast, the second part of Revelation 13, is broadly representative of the religious sphere. So think about it like this, that the first beast in the first part of chapter 13 is perversion of the state. The second beast is the perversion of what is true worship. Not the devil himself, but empowered and animated by the devil. Now, this letter would have gone to 7 churches in Asia Minor, but it's an expression of the way the devil works in every century and every age. He isn't reduced or constrained to those 2, but as he wishes to lead a movement away from the church, distracted from following Christ, he often uses those 2 things, a perversion of the state and a perversion of worship. We'll go through verse by verse, a few comments on each verse to help us understand what the passage is talking about. And then toward the end, I'll spend more time on verse 18. Verse 18 says, "This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is a number of a man, and his number is 666. Well known amongst conspiracy theorists, well known 666 is not a number that we particularly like. So we'll try and spend some time understanding what 666 means, but it calls for wisdom. And that's what I want us to sort of remember all the time. In the first part of the chapter 13, there was a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. After explaining how the devil works through corrupt governments, the singular call on the Christian life is faithfulness and patient endurance. So if the first beast ended with a call for faithfulness, the second beast ends with a call for us to have wisdom. The first beast is strong, powerful, and persecuting, a corrupt government persecuting the church. The second beast that comes along the first beast is a deceiver and counterfeit and fake. So to understand and withhold the second beast, we need wisdom. But that's where we'll end. In verse 11, it says that then I saw another beast rising out of the earth, 2 horns like a lamb, it spoke like a dragon. And as we had with the other beast, this is from Daniel 8, where Daniel sees a vision of a ram with 2 horns. But here it looks like a lamb, which should already be signaling something to us, because we've seen the lamb in chapter 5, the lamb who looked like he was slain but received worship. So this is a fake lamb, if you like, a counterfeit lamb. The person or the principle is a counterfeit Christ. The beast looks like Christ, looks like a lamb, but actually has the voice of a dragon. Now, this is the same John who wrote the Gospel of John. And he says in chapter 10 of his Gospel, the sheep will know his voice. The sheep know the voice of the shepherd, who is also the lamb. But counterfeit religion always looks good and has something that draws people to it. If it was obvious and just looked like a spiky devil, that demonic presence will not attract people to follow as a counterfeit Christ. So the first beast is a perversion of the state, but the second beast is a counterfeit religion. And we shouldn't expect false religion to be obviously false. We should expect false religion to talk about God, to talk about love, to talk about even being moral. But it's a counterfeit Trinity, if you like. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit has been mimicked by the dragon, the first and second beast. So we shouldn't be surprised when there are things that look similar but are only superficial. We should expect cults. We should expect kind of almost Christian language and religious themes, which is why the passage ends with a call for wisdom. The beast may look like a lamb, which is why we need wisdom. Is he speaking the truth? Is it the voice of the lamb or the voice of the dragon? The second beast is a counterfeit. Verse 11, looks like a lamb, speaks from the dragon. Verse 12, it exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose mortal wound was healed. Here we see the relationship between the two beasts. Second beast is, if you like, an accomplice of the first. And this has happened throughout history, that oppressive, tyrannical governments have a place for religion. It may not look like an official religion, it may be anti-religion, as it was in the communist world, but don't be fooled. It is an ideology that goes along with the false government. There's an ism. Karl Marx said that religion is the opiate of the people. And Marxism is a religious impulse. It is a way of looking at the world and giving purpose and meaning. So the most tyrannical states on earth have a religious impulse. Now that was true in the first century, where they had an imperial cult. There were priests, there were sacrifices, there were rituals, there was religion. The whole apparatus of Rome supported the deification of the emperor and his tyrannical and at times crazy undertakings. So what we saw in the Roman Empire was fake religion supporting the state, and sometimes making mandatory the worship of the state. And religion at its worst does nothing but encourage the support of a corrupt and blasphemous state. But Christianity, while we want to influence the state as we should, we must always be on the lookout for the danger that religion is secondary to the state and then becomes a way of paying homage to and doing whatever the state wants the religion to do. And it is often the case, because we're made in the image of God, we yearn for transcendence. We want to be connected to something bigger than us. And as Christianity has been on the decline, it's not going to lead more people into baseball or American Pie. It will lead a vacuum for religious impulse. It will, as people stop going to church, their time won't necessarily be filled by doing other things. It will leave a vacuum for the impulse of religion, because everyone wants to be part of something bigger than themselves. Now, political parties can supplant religious affiliation, allegiance to a country, allegiance to a theory, allegiance to an ism, and even in a way that seems more palatable, sports. That's something that gives you that purpose, that wakes you up in the morning and you feel like you're touching transcendence, something bigger than you. It can even be spirituality in music or entertainment, where the devil can get you to find that ultimate purpose in anything and something other than Christ. So the second beast lives wherever the devil entices people to worship something that is man-made, to make an idol out of anything but Christ. In the first century, it was the collusion of the religion of Rome and the worship of the emperor. But it takes shapes in different places as well. And in verse 13, it performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. The second beast is the false prophet. 3 times Revelation makes reference to the beast and the false prophet. Chapter 16, verse 13, 19, verse 20, and chapter 20, verse 10. Another name for the second beast is the false prophet. And as many of the commentaries on Revelation say, the second beast is the minister of propaganda. He deceives people to follow the first beast. In verse 11, we saw the second beast as a false Christ. But in these verses, we see him as an imitation of Elijah. Elijah called down fire from heaven to burn the sacrifices in the presence of the priests of Baal, because they cut themselves and cried out to heaven hour upon hour. And Elijah called down fire from heaven. They were idolaters, they worshipped the false god. But here they have the appearance, they do signs. It's not clear if that's supernatural or something that have a natural explanation. You remember where we are in Exodus, that the magicians threw down their staff and made a snake. And as I've been saying on Lord's Day mornings, their powers is only the power of imitation and destruction. They can't create, they can't heal. So one of the ways to have wisdom and to discern is to think, is the thing that I'm spending all my time on, does it have power to bring newness of life, as following Christ does? Or is it always pulling people down, pointing out the errors of others, destroying? So it's a counterfeit, but it has the ability to perform signs, but we can never be impressed with signs unless they point us to the Son of God. Verse 15, and it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak, and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. In other words, the second beast persuades the world that the image of the first beast is truly God. So the second beast is the minister of propaganda, leading people to a position of awe and homage to the state. And in the first century, the religious establishment, the priests, the sacrifices, the rituals, convinced people that they should worship Caesar. The coins which have come down from that era have the names, the Son of God, the Lord, the one who came from heaven to earth. It's fake, it's counterfeit, and it's blasphemous. So the beast gives breath to these things so the emperor would appear godlike. Now, even in our day, wherever there is this impulse to say you can't be happy, you can't be fulfilled unless you bow the knee, unless your life revolves around that thing that is other than Christ. And it's the work of the beast. Verse 16. Also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy and sell unless he has the mark, that is the name of the beast or the number of its name. There's lots of speculation about these verses, and normally completely misguided and bonkers. No one knows where the imagery comes from, or even if it is meant to have a special allusion in the first century. But many people think of barcodes. And the minute you hear of somebody who has a passport, that's somewhere in their skin or something like that, or your credit card, or your microchip, or the fact that Apple know exactly where you are all the time, or your social security number, none of these things would have meant anything to the first century people. They'd never heard of any of those things. So what might they have thought was the mark of the beast? What would they have thought? Because we can't only think of the 21st century and coming through passport control in a new way. It could be an allusion to slaves, branding. A slave was branded as belonging to a master, or a soldier received a tattoo indicating the regiment that he was a part of. Or it could have been the practice of compulsory idol worship in the first century, that you had to be marked as having fulfilled your obligation. Any or all of those could have been in the background, but the mark is not meant to be a visible mark. And that's the main point. We're talking about an invisible spiritual identification. Because there are several places in Revelation where it speaks about God's people having a mark. The righteous, the believing, have the Father's name, singular, written on their forehead. Now, none of us, I hope, think that means that we go down to a tattoo parlor tomorrow to have Father put on our forehead. Or that we need to have a tattoo of the Trinity somewhere. That is not what it means. So if we understand that for us, it is symbolic language, that the name on the forehead means you belong to God. But it's invisible. So if we understand that instinctively with Christians, it has to be the same thing with those who bear the mark of the beast. It's an invisible stamp of approval. Because those who belong to Christ have an invisible stamp of approval. That's why we baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It identifies you. And there are hints of in baptism when it speaks about the name of the Father on your forehead, because you receive in baptism the triune name. It's a public act. It's a public witness. But not that you have a public branding. It's not barcodes or credit cards or social security numbers. The point of the verse is simpler. It's telling us that if you compromise with the world, you will suffer. In the first century, if you refuse to worship Caesar, to have the mark of the beast, it would mean persecution. So if you refuse to bow down to Caesar, you would be persecuted. In other words, the world has a way of operating when push comes to shove, whatever it costs us. It may cost us a scholarship. It may cost us a promotion. It may cost us to get ahead in our sports. It may cost us our lives. We will never give in to the system of the world. So we must be prepared as Christians to suffer setbacks, strange looks, shame, suffering, and say no. And we won't do what everyone else in the world thinks we ought to do, whether it's how we treat our Sundays, or whether it has what kind of flags we're going to fly, or what kind of pronouns we put in our bio. We will not follow the systems of the world, no matter the cost. And then verse 18, the most debated verse probably in Revelation, if not the Bible. This calls for wisdom. It starts off with that the one who is understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Now, it certainly is the verse that has produced the most fruitless debate. All kinds of numerical schemes have been concocted in various languages to decode what 666 meant. I had a dear brother in the church in Vienna who was convinced he'd had some calculation, he'd done some work, and he spent hours on it and came up with 666 means the European Union. And he was convinced, and I did tell him once, I said, has anyone ever told the guy that you think is the mark, has the, is the beast, that he is the beast? But, in many people have said 666 meant Domitian, Caesar God, and the word Latinos for the Roman Empire. Antimos, Phoebus, Balaam, Muhammad, Martin Luther, Oliver Cromwell, Kaiser Wilhelm, Hitler, the Nicolaitans, the Titans, not the football team, and the initials of the Roman emperors from Julius Caesar to Vespasian, as long as you minus Otho and Vitellius, the triangular number of 36, which is the triangular number of 8, which is significant because 8 is associated with Gnosticism for some, because of the 8th king in Revelation 17. The Latin Kingdom, the Italian Church, the popes, all the popes, the Vicar of the Son of God, and Ronald Wilson Reagan, because he had 6 letters in each of his names. So, that is what people have done. If they don't like somebody, they find some kind of formula to say, well, that's 666. And all of these solutions had been calculated by a process called gematria, where every letter corresponds to a number. Now that may seem far-fetched to us, but it wasn't uncommon in the ancient world. So it's not ridiculous to think that 666 meant a name, because people did that in the ancient world. There's examples of gematria because it's where letters stood for numbers. The one that had the most traction is that 666 was Nero. If you take the Greek, Neron Caesar, and you transliterate it into Hebrew, you get 50 plus 200 plus 6 plus 50. And if you take Caesar and transliterate that into Hebrew, you get 100 plus 60 plus 200. And if you add that up, 666. And so there is a corroboration for this view is found in the Latin version of his name. If you take the Greek Neron Caesar, transliterate it into Hebrew, add up the numbers, and then if you take the Greek and transliterate it into Latin, you add up the numbers, you get 616, which is why at the end of verse 18, there's a little footnote, some manuscripts say 616. Now, Nero fits the storyline of Revelation better than other alternatives. He killed himself in AD 68, but it was rumored that he'd faked his own death. The beast receives a fatal wound that was healed. And it would make sense that Christians might want Nero in the form of a riddle like this, because it protected the Christians from charges of further persecution. I didn't say Nero. I just said 666. And if we're meant to find a specific person as a referent to 666, maybe the best solution is Nero. However, I'm not convinced that we're meant to see 666 as Nero. There's so many problems with the calculation. John's audience would not have known Hebrew. Some would have been Jewish Christians who'd have understood Hebrew, but many, probably most, did not. So relying on your readers to not only know gematria, but to translate a name from Greek into a different language seems a poor way to answer the puzzle. That's the first reason why I'm not convinced. Secondly, to come up with 666, you have to spell Neron Caesar incorrectly in Hebrew. You have to leave out one letter, Yod. Well, some people say, well, that's acceptable. But it wasn't the normal spelling. Third, none of the church fathers calculated Neron Caesar from 666. There's a 5th century document 400 years later that calculates Nero, but it uses the word Antichristus to get to 616. The fourth reason I'm skeptical is it doesn't call us to be riddle solvers. When it says let him calculate the number, the solution is given in the next line. It doesn't say go and solve the riddle of 666. It says let us give the number of the beast, and here is the number of the beast the number of a man that is 666. I'll come back to that in a few moments. The fifth reason, this isn't how numbers work in Revelation. It's never this complicated. It's never this decoding. Numbers are real important. The church is symbolized by 24 elders, 2 witnesses, a woman, and 144,000. The church is symbolized by that. The church age is symbolized by pictures: a measured temple, a trampled witness, a woman protected in the wilderness. And then you've got the numbers 42 months, 1,260 days, 3.5 years. And false religion is symbolized by 666. But in each case, the pictures and the numbers do mean something, but they refer to general truths, not individual. They're not specific references that you're supposed to then go away and spend a lot of time discern and encode what it means. But it's an impression like looking at a painting, and you understand as the symbolism hits you what you're talking about. My last reason for being skeptical about Nero: if dozens of names can be calculated from 666, how effective is it? One author tells us it doesn't tell us much that a certain key fits the lock, or if it is a lock that works with almost any key, any one you don't like, you could find a way of spelling to make 666. So if 666 is not code for Nero, what does it mean? I don't think 666 is meant to be a riddle hiding the number of the beast. It is simply the name and the number of the beast. It is the number of a man. What have we been seeing with the second beast? Well, he's counterfeit. He's fake. The beast is the expression of fake religion. And knowing what we know about numbers in Revelation, if you wanted to have a counterfeit number but falls short, what might a divine number be? If you wanted to have a numerical trinity, you might have 777, because 7 is the most important number in Revelation. So if you wanted a fake religion, not God, but one that is close but falls short, you could have 666. If 7 is the number of perfection and holy completion in Revelation, 7 churches, 7 lampstands, 7 eyes, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, etc. If 7 is the number of the completion of God, it stands to reason that 6 is the number of unholy imperfection. So if 7 is God's number, 6 is man's number, so 666 is counterfeit to 777. It's a caricature, it's a counterfeit, never reaching the divine number. Threefold, falling short. You have the dragon. It's saying if the dragon is 6, the first beast is 6, the second beast is 6, together 666. So what John, I believe, is saying is we'll label the second beast, who supports the first beast, all of which causes us to worship the dragon, we'll name him 666. It's the number of a man, perhaps a literal antichrist at some point in history, but 1 John says there are many antichrists. It may be a specific figure who is a religious counterfeit. It's the number of man-made counterfeit religion. So the first beast from the sea is strong, powerful, oppressive. And the call in verse 10 is for endurance and faithfulness. The second beast is fake, false, deceptive, and idolatrous, which is why 18 says, call for wisdom. So when the state persecutes you, oppresses you, there will be times when the power of the state is so oppressive, no plan can thwart the schemes of a tyrannical government. And what's the appeal? To endure. You'll suffer, but don't give in. But here, the call is for discernment or wisdom. How are we to be wise in facing a counterfeit faith, a fake religion. For starters, realize that wisdom is necessary because it won't be obvious when the person or the religious impulse is false. I often think that when we try and recreate religion that is so it's attractive to man, that's the first step of a slippery slope to fake religion. Because if we make it more palatable to man, surely we're making less of God. Now, if you're meeting this beast in the wild, he would look like a Christian. He exercised great authority, just like Christ says, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. He does great signs, just like Christ performed great signs. He attracts a great following. So we need to realize that wisdom is necessary. But in closing, 3 questions. It calls for wisdom. First question is, am I going along with an idea or a practice because I feel I will lose my reputation, my friends, my life, if I don't go along with it? Am I going along with an idea, a practice, a behavior, convincing myself, trying to sell it to myself that it's acceptable because the pressure is so great? You feel that I'll lose my job, my reputation, my friends, my health, even my life. That is the impulse of the beast. It's not to say that peer pressure cannot be good peer pressure. That's what a community of faith is. But if you're fearful, convincing yourself that you have to believe something new, that you know isn't what you've been taught in church, it's not what you've ever seen in the Bible, but you've convinced yourself that the pressure is too great not to do it. It's often the work of the second beast getting us to bow the knee to the first beast. The second question is, does this experience or passion of religious fervor lead me to glory in man or God? Does the experience that I'm experiencing, this passion, this new movement, does it lead me to glory man or God? Now, we must be careful. There are ordered loves. J.D. Vance was very famous for posting about ordo amoris. But there is such a thing as ordered loves. God comes first. And then you love your family. And it's good to love your country. And then it's good to love your city. And it's good to love your sports team. And it's good to love your hobbies. That's a good thing. Don't hear that if you're into anything else apart from being in church, you're an idol worshipper. But if your passion leads you to find purpose outside that ordered love, meaning your ultimate satisfaction is in a man or a woman or a politician, a sports hero, a movie star, a singer, and that is your satisfaction, that's what gets you going in the morning, giving you purpose, and your community is all around that. What holds you together with your best friends? What leads you to find your purpose and satisfaction instead of God? So there is such a thing as ordered loves, that the first love has to always be God. And the third question is, does this spirituality or fake religion or impulse or newfound purpose in life lead me to be closer to Jesus? And this is where the sermon or the message gets good, but can also get dangerous. If you think about it, there are many things that have become religion in the world today. Environmentalism is a religion. Social justice is a religion. On the other end of the scale, nationalism is a religion. Or critical theory. And Christians say the same things. They haven't jetonized any of the statement of faith in their brain, but what animates them? What is their life about? What is their community shaped by? Is it one of these things? And they have a religious dimension to them. So if you take environmentalism, there was a fall, there was a pristine world, and now we have polluted it, and therefore we need to live a lifetime of penance to rid ourselves of our sin in polluting the environment, so that we can reach sinless perfection in the natural world. And so while there's nothing wrong in taking good care of the environment, if it leads us to that kind of worship, it is worshipping a false god. Or critical theory does that. Original sin. And then there's a priestly class. And then there is a certain text that inform you. But Christianity says there's only God and sinners. And false ideologies cut this way and divide class against class, nationality against nationality, colour against colour, and oppressor against oppressed. So the line is horizontal, people against people. Whereas ultimately it's God who we've sinned against and whose forgiveness we need. So while these things may have good things in them, they cannot be the ultimate goal. Because if it's only horizontal, if it's colour against colour, if it's this against that, it's at this level. But the only level is God and man. And that we've all sinned and we all need forgiveness. So test everything in relationship to Jesus Christ. The beast will have a large following. So it's not just success. We cannot say that whether it seems to work or not. But what we need to come back to is the principle in my life. It's what I do with my time, leading me to worship Jesus Christ more and more in the fullness of his deity, the fullness of his humanity, to recognize him as unique, not only a prophet or teacher, but as the Son of God, the only way by which we can have salvation. Come back to John's Gospel, last 2 weeks or a few weeks. Is he the final and complete revelation of the Father? Is his death, resurrection uppermost in your heart? Is he praised? So is the movement you give your life to causing you to praise Christ more as the wrath-absorbing, hell-taking, penalty-paying, guilt-expiating sacrifice for sinners? Is he Christ the Messiah, the Son of the living God? Is he leading you to love him for his lion-like power and his lamb-like suffering? Test everything. Because false religion is counterfeit, and there's a name for false religion, and it's 666. It's the religion and the worship of man. And the devil doesn't care what you worship as long as it's not Christ. Now, John wrote at the end of 1 John that we're the children of God, and the whole world is under the control of the evil one. But we know the Son of God has come and given us understanding, that we might know him who is true, and we who are in him who is true, even his Son, Jesus Christ. He is the true God and eternal life. And John says, dear children, keep yourself from idols. Which is why I think we continue to worship God in his word, and we believe and that everything that he says in his word is for our good. We don't try and leave out some parts. We follow him according to his word, but we worship the one who the word points to, who is Jesus Christ. Well, I'll take questions. Thank you. Appreciate you.